Have you ever said something like this about yourself? I'm just not a patient person. I'm an anxious person. I'm clumsy. I'm just not good at fill in the blank. We say these things so casually, like they're facts, like they're just who we are. But what if they're not facts? What if they're just old stories you've been telling yourself for so long that they started to feel true? Hey, it's Corinne, your mental performance coach for everyday life. And welcome back to Everyday MVP. This episode started with a message from one of you. A member of the Mindlete team asked me to look into human evolution, why we're wired for change as a species. And in that same message, she wrote one sentence I couldn't stop thinking about. This is my personality and I can't control it. And right beside it, she added, yes, you can. That got me thinking. Not whether humans are capable of change biologically. We are. That's an episode for another day. Instead, it got me thinking about identity, about the stories we mistake for facts, about the labels we stop questioning, about why we become so convinced we can't change. Because I don't think the biggest obstacle to change is our ability. I think it's the stories we tell ourselves about what we're capable of. The problem isn't that we notice patterns in ourselves. The problem is when we mistake those patterns for permanent identities. Because here's the thing, when we say, this is my personality, I can't control it, or simply, that's just who I am, we're usually falling into two thinking traps at once. The first is labeling. You take one behavior or one pattern and you slap a permanent identity on it, on top of it. Not, I felt anxious in that meeting, but I am an anxious person. Not, I dropped that, but I am a clumsy person. The label sticks harder than the moment ever did. The second thinking trap is overgeneralization. You take your past, what you've done before, what happened to you, and you let it write the rules for your future forever. As if who you were at 22 or who you were the day you made a mistake gets a permanent vote on who you get to become. Put those two traps together and you get people who are stuck. Not because they actually can't change, but because they've convinced themselves the door isn't even there. And it turns out those two thinking traps don't just keep us stuck in the moment. They connect to another area of psychology. Carol Dweck spent decades studying what happens when we believe our abilities are fixed instead of something we can develop. She called that way of thinking a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset says your abilities are basically set. You either have them or you don't. And when you believe that, you start protecting the identity you've built around yourself. You care more about proving yourself than improving yourself. Challenges become something to avoid because they might prove you're not as capable as you hoped. Feedback feels personal. Someone else's success feels threatening. And mistakes become evidence that the label was right all along. The result? They don't stop because they've reached their potential. They stop because they've decided they already know where it ends. But that isn't the only way to see yourself. Dweck also studied the opposite belief, the idea that our abilities aren't fixed, but can be developed over time. She called this a growth mindset. And a growth mindset starts from a different assumption, that abilities can be developed. Challenges start to become opportunities to learn instead of threats to avoid. Feedback becomes useful. Mistakes become information instead of identity. Setbacks don't knock you out because they were never proof that you're broken. They're just data. And someone else's success stops feeling like proof that you can't do something and starts showing you what's possible. Dweck describes people with a growth mindset as those who value what they're doing, regardless of the outcome. Not because the outcome doesn't matter, but because the process is what makes the outcome possible. Now, here's where people sometimes misunderstand what a growth mindset actually is. It isn't pretending you're good at everything. It isn't blindly telling yourself, I can do anything. And it definitely isn't just trying harder with a strategy that isn't working. A real growth mindset is being willing to learn. It's putting in effort, adjusting your approach when you need to, asking for help, and giving yourself permission to be a beginner. I know that sounds like a big psychological idea, but honestly, it shows up in really ordinary places. Let me show you what it looks like for me recently. For years, I told myself I couldn't make sourdough bread. Not I haven't tried, I can't. I wasn't that person. I told myself I'd kill the starter, I'd mess it up, it just wasn't going to happen for me. There was just too much involved. And then a friend recently offered to teach me. And I want to be honest, I almost said no because some part of me had already decided how this story ended before I even started. But I said yes. And it was fun. It was genuinely fun to be a total beginner at something again, to ask questions, to be willing to mess up a loaf, to try again. And now I found real success and real fulfillment in a skill I had convinced myself was off limits for me. Nothing about my ability changed the day my friend taught me. What changed was the story I was telling myself about what I was capable of. So, this week's MVP challenge is all about catching yourself and taking the identity out of it. So, listen for the next time you say, I'm just not a blank person, or I'm clumsy, or I'm anxious, or any sentence where you've turned a behavior into an identity. When you hear it, pause. Ask yourself, is that actually true? Or is it just a story I've repeated so many times it feels true? Then, do one simple thing. Say what actually happened instead of who you supposedly are. Not, I'm clumsy. Instead, I dropped something. Not, I'm a patient person. Or not, I'm not a patient person. Instead, I felt impatient in that moment. Not, I'm bad at this. Instead, I haven't gotten good at this yet. Then go one step further. Pick that same label and do one small thing that contradicts it. If you've been telling yourself, I'm not good with people, have one small conversation this week you normally avoid. If you said, I'm not a morning person, wake up 15 minutes earlier once this week, just once, and use that time intentionally. That's the whole challenge. Catch the label, name the behavior, then do one small thing that shows that label isn't the whole story. One moment isn't a life sentence. It's just a moment. Because sometimes the biggest thing holding us back isn't that the door is locked. It's that we've convinced ourselves there isn't a door at all. So don't let an old label decide what's possible for you. Change is allowed. Change is good. We're built to evolve. That's not a flaw. That's the design. And remember, Mindlete team, your most valuable player is you. Every day is a new day. Breathe in, breathe out. You've got this.